And this is another quote that I just find very meaningful is we have a responsibility to our program recipients. They've had so many losses in their lives, and for us to come in for a year or two or three and give them hope only to have the program go away, we've just caused another loss and a future loss of hope in their lives. That just speaks for itself, I guess. But what we're doing here is really important. Next slide. So I'm going to turn this over to Chris, and she's going to talk a little bit about the intersection of prevention, treatment, recovery, and really how important that is to true long-term sustainability for any of our efforts. Chris?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Karen. Let's see. So I'm going to start. I couldn't decide if this would be a fable or an allegory. So you can tell me when we're done. I'm better in conversation. So I'm not so much a talk at you, but I like to talk with you and get a better. So at the end of this, I'm hoping to get a better understanding of kind of where you all sit on this continuum that we're all on within prevention, treatment, and recovery. And I hope you enjoy the story. Many of you are probably familiar with it. So there were once three sisters walking by a river, and all at once they noticed there are a bunch of babies floating in the river, and they're struggling. And the sisters saw many babies floating in the river, and they were not doing well as babies would do. Can you click to the next slide? All right, the first sister ran right in the river, started picking up as many babies as she could, bringing them to the shore, but there were too many babies for her to pick up. And she cried out to the other sisters, "Sisters, come help. There are too many babies for me." The second sister ran into the river and started to teach the babies to doggy paddle and get close to the shore and crawl out. She called to the third sister and said, "Sister, come help. There's too many babies for me to help." And then the third sister ran all the way upstream on the bank of the river to figure out who was throwing the babies in the river. So my question to you all is, which sister did the right thing and which sister was in the wrong? And I'll tell you now, there is not a correct answer to this. So kind of think about your work and think about the processes you do. And if we're talking about substance use disorder recovery, I heard it in some of your messaging when you introduced yourselves, but feel free to unmute yourself and kind of talk about where you stand, which sister you are, and the importance of that role that you play.
Personally, I don't think it's a right and wrong thing. I think it's really a matter of you can't necessarily do one thing and hope that that one thing is going to solve the entire issue. These issues are huge. And so, you know, if you look at the 7 strategies for community change, why do you think there's 7? There's 7 because you can't use a bullet shot, you know, a single shot approach. You really have to use more of a scattered approach, and you have to do multiple things in order to affect change. You can't affect change by just one thing necessarily.
Mm-hmm. You're with Pathways, is that correct, Elise?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So did you have a thought when you were thinking about the 3 sisters? Which do you feel like Pathways encompasses all of those? One of those more than others?
I think we actually do all of them. We touch on all of them. Mm-hmm. We do prevention education in the classrooms. We actually go into the classrooms. So at that point, we're doing, you know, sort of that modified individual strategy. We do brief intervention, so we're one-on-one. So that's a little bit more, you know, for those identified kids, right? And then we swam upstream and started a coalition. So we may just be crazy. I'm not sure.
No.
We got all the 3 sisters sitting in our crazy corner.
Yeah.
And we really need to figure out how to sustain them all. Otherwise, we may not have any babies floating.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
This is Nicole from Denver. I mean, I agree. I definitely think each sister had really good intentions and was just doing what they could with what they had in an effort to help when they saw something was going wrong. So as a treatment provider, I suppose we at ARP are most like sister two. So we are getting in the water with, we follow a medical model, so we call them patients, but we get in the water with them and help them try to figure out how to get out of the depths of it, you know, when they're in the moment and in the throes of their addiction. So teaching them skills like how to doggy paddle and various skills to try to help themselves and cope with what's going on to achieve hopefully some level of stability so that we can start working on more long-term sustainable therapeutic practices, right, to kind of address those underlying concerns, worries, problems that they are using to try to cope with, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anyone else? What about Jeremy or Anna? Anna Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's aspects of what we do that would be represented by each one of the sisters, whether it's the youth kind of program we started that or the family program, you know, that we tried to start before COVID. That kind of speaks to the prevention and stuff like that. But really, I mean, with our harm reduction programs and kind of what we do as an RCO, it's kind of like we're jumping in the water and kind of like pulling you out, but we're also, like Nicole said, teaching you the skills to where you can swim on your own, right? To get you from a clinical management to self-management is the goal, right? But I think, like, as I was listening to your allegory, or what, whichever one we're going to choose, I just thought it spoke to the importance of ROSC, of how, like, I can't be in the water pulling you out in crisis and teaching these other people how to swim, and how we partner and strategically partner with people so that you can go down the river and see what's going on while I'm doing this, while somebody else is doing this, really speaks to what we need to be doing, or what direction we should be going in.
Yeah, to just build on what Jeremy was saying, is like I feel like overarching, like the responses of like the second and third sister are like closer in line to like the kind of bigger things that we talk about, and as we like try to develop programs and think about who we are as an RCO. But like, given my role, my day-to-day is a lot more of the first sister's response of like people coming in who have pretty pressing, like, immediate needs. And so my day-to-day has a lot more of that in it usually, and then just sprinkled in with the other parts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's helpful for me to hear too, in moving forward with our sessions and talking about sustainability. And I think when we think about what resources we have available, to know there's different skill sets that go into the sister who jumps in the water and just pulls people out. And there's different skill sets that go into teaching people to swim. And then there's different skill sets about moving upriver and like, why are all these babies going in? How is this happening? And I'm not at all indicating you can't do all three or you shouldn't do all three, but to realize like, oh, this means we have to have really unique skill sets for each of these three distinct areas. And you're right, Elise, there is no right or wrong. And so this is, you might be familiar with this, I don't know, arrow, cycle, whatever you want to call it, continuum. And it really stems from William White's work. And so it's really an idea of movement through the recovery process. And so stages of recovery, you might hear it termed as stages of recovery, but we look at pre-recovery, recovery initiation, recovery maintenance. that enhanced quality of personal life and family life in long-term recovery. And then, of course, breaking the intergenerational cycles of addiction. And so again, this is just to kind of get you to look at like, where on this scope, in this continuum, do we kind of land, and where do we work, and what skill sets and resources do we need to sustain that work? All are really valuable, all are really important, and all are completely necessary for the life cycle of someone in their recovery process. And so, you know, you might find that you work in multiple areas. And then the key, of course, is partnerships with other organizations, because it's really hard. It's really difficult. From my personal experience working in a recovery community organization, it was really hard for me to do all of these, or to create an organization that did all of these things and did them really well and really robustly. We know that our rates of reoccurrence and people returning to treatment are exceptionally high. And so where in the system are we seeing kind of gaps and cracks? And so again, how can we kind of look towards partnering with other organizations that do these things really, really well, so that we can do our work really, really well? And then hopefully, you know, do a warm handoff or help someone enter in the new community when they're at that new stage or that cycle within their recovery process. And that one. So some challenges, common challenges, as our systems are really siloed. Our funding streams are really siloed. We see that when some of those SAMHSA block grants come out, right? It comes to prevention, it goes to treatment, and it goes to recovery. And oftentimes there's little incentive for us to partner, because again, we almost see it as competitive funding. So when prevention gets that chunk of money, recovery is not getting that chunk of money. So oftentimes, again, we clash and almost become competitors for this really small amount of funding that we have available to us. And then oftentimes a lack of consensus and collaboration. And oftentimes I think it's because we're not intentionally in the same space. So we're not coming to the same tent. We're oftentimes not creating spaces or we have to be intentional if we want to create those spaces that we all show up in, so that I know what my local prevention community is doing, and I know what my local treatment provider community is doing, and I know what my local recovery community is doing. Because right now, oftentimes the way we're set up, we don't have that deep level of communication and planning to be really intentional about how we all move forward to care for this really vulnerable group of people. And opportunities, so increased awareness of the continuum of care and the ecology of recovery. I love that I'm hearing more and more conversation from all aspects talking about, you know, how do we serve people who are in active use and give them care and dignity and respect and honor the place that they're at, all the way to how do we help people maintain their long-term recovery out in the community, and whatever that looks like for them, and how do we provide a range of services in between. And those partnerships can often be incentivized and rewarded because philanthropic organizations are looking for those partnerships. So philanthropic organizations are moving away from funding a single agency to do their thing. They want to see all these different agencies come together, and they want to fund those really robust, innovative efforts. And then we're too very, very much so, I feel like we're in a time of the expansion of recovery support services into treatment and non-traditional settings. So we're seeing the use of peers more and more. And again, from things like street outreach to being integrated into clinical treatment settings, integrated into recovery courts, different aspects of law enforcement, into libraries. I heard about a program integrating peers into a laundromat, and then recovery community organizations. And so I think the expansion of recovery support services really like amplifies the voice of our ultimate customer. So all of us are serving people who have experiences with substance use disorders. And so in another way, that would be our customer if we're doing like a marketing strategy. And so we're bringing the voice of the customer into what we do when we hire people with lived experience, and when we have them on our coalitions, and when we have them as our staff members, because they bring with them that wealth of knowledge of their experiences navigating this often really difficult, really cumbersome system. Next slide. Is this mine, Karen? Yeah, okay. So sorry. So 4 things organizations must sustain are strong volunteer and membership base. And so I think that might, and Nicole, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this might apply a little bit more to recovery community organizations and prevention coalitions. But I think it's worth for clinical treatment zones to really look at how do they engage people once they're done with their clinical process? How do they keep them in that continuum of care in their natural community? So again, historically, the medical model, as soon as services are done, we don't have communication with that provider that we just receive treatment from. And so how do treatment providers kind of open things up and start to look at how do we keep those folks engaged so that we can actually measure and track 1, 5, 10-year outcomes and our interventions effective? A credible process. Oh, go ahead. You just credible process, relevance to the current community concerns, and financial and other resources required to do the work. I'm sorry, this wasn't my slide, so I wasn't as familiar with the contents of this one. And so the 6 R's, so I think everybody here knows relationships are key, whether that's with our coalition members or the broader facing community, with our staff members. People need to feel important and valued. We have to cultivate those relationships early. A mistake I had made is not really, I would look for partnerships when the RFP came out. So the RFP would come out and I'd be like, oh my gosh, we need to partner with this organization and that organization because we could really build something innovative and creative and wonderful. And oftentimes I could, wished I could have hit rewind 6 months so that I could start showing up to their events and start finding ways to support their work and invite them to support my work. So when that RFP came out or that opportunity for funding came out, I already had a solid working relationship with those community partners. Role is just really touching on when you invite someone into your organization, again, as a coalition member, as a staff member, as a volunteer, you want to make sure that their role is defined, that they know what they're going to be doing and that they have a purpose for being in there. That's kind of the what's in it for me. They're coming there to give back, but they're wanting something for your organization. So knowing kind of what that is and how can you support their needs while they're giving back to your community. Respect. So again, that's really a basis of following through on what you say you're going to do, making sure your meetings start on time, making sure they end on time, making sure that people feel productive when they're there, that they don't just tune out and they feel like, well, I'm kind of just a fly on the wall. I'm not really a part of this process. Why do I have to keep showing up for these meetings? I had a good dear friend who's a member of a Native American tribe here in Minnesota said he was just so tired of being asked to be on different coalitions and volunteer here or engage in this group because he felt like every time he was just there to check a box that they had a member of a Native American community there so they could check their box and meet their grant requirements. Recognition, so we can always find ways to recognize our wins, no matter how small they may be, and recognition of the people doing the hard work. And if we can make that a public-facing recognition, people love to share with their family and friends what they're volunteering for or the coalition they're a part of. you know, highlighted them in a newsletter or on their social media pages, and really just cheering people on. That's such an important part of sustaining that membership. And then rewards, again, that kind of goes back to the what's in it for them. So are they looking to you know, build a skill set? Do they want to become a better public speaker? Are you giving them opportunities to do that? Are they looking to connect with others? Are they in a coalition because the community is really important and valuable to them, and the relationships they form in the coalition are really important to them? Or are they looking to further advance career opportunities even for themselves? So are they coming into this work thinking, how can I, you know, build my professional network so that if I go out job seeking, I have more you know, connections out in the community. And the last one is results. So that's all about being able to demonstrate and show our members how the work they were doing was successful. So oftentimes we're quick to write it in a newsletter or post it on our website and kind of show the world, look, what we're doing works. But oftentimes we forget to turn that kind of inward and share that with our membership, and really, again, use that as a chance for recognition to say, look, you did X and Y happened. And that was our plan, that was our strategy, and it worked. And that just really builds people's confidence, and it really helps them stay engaged and involved in the coalition or as a volunteer, because they know what they're doing has purpose and meaning and value. I think that was, and now I'll turn it back over to Karen. Did anybody have questions about any of that portion? No, good. All right.
Thank you, Chris. You know, hearing that makes me also think that a lot of this is very relevant to strategic planning when organizations start thinking about, you know, the big picture and making sure that those factors are included in their strategic planning as well. So we're going to cover some material now on some tools that are available to help you assess your programs and to help you think about sustainability. So I'm going to go through a few of those, and then we'll take a little break and then come back to them. So this is another quote that I really like. Activities become routine when they reflect the collective values and beliefs of members. So really keeping that in mind, and what we're looking for is for things to become routine and be the way that things are done within an organization, the way things are done here. So the next slide. So again, I'm going to show you a couple different tools, and you can take what you like and leave the rest, basically. But there's a number of these tools that kind of outline ways to think about sustainability and ways to do sort of a needs assessment of where you're at. And they tend to overlap, and they tend to represent similar information. So pick the one that, you know, resonates with you and your organization, and you can use it as a process for sort of planning, assessing where you're at, and thinking about things that you want to focus on to enhance sustainability. So the first one was in your packet, and it's also on our site, and it looks a little bit like this. It's a scale that was just developed, just published, and it involved like about 150 different participants who had SAMHSA funding for prevention programs. And they compiled all these different factors, and they put it together in this scale to sort of have you and your staff be able to sit down and kind of decide where you fall in these different pieces. So there's things like sustainment indicators. The project continues to operate as described in the original application for funding. The project continues to deliver to the intended population. continues to provide services that are evidence-based, etc. And then there's a section on funding and financial support that I think is also helpful to sort of like, where do you fall in terms of this type of the combination of funding, whether it's stable or flexible, discretionary. There's also a section on responsiveness to community needs, and that, you know, thinking through different aspects there, as well as community values. The project delivered meets the needs of again, the intended population, and the project can be adapted to meet the needs of the communities or populations served. The project is consistent with norms, values, and guiding principles. So it takes you through a way to sort of assess where you're at. Again, this was sort of designed around prevention coalitions, but I think a lot of it is relevant, you know, to all aspects. Like when Nicole was talking about, as a treatment organization, like making sure the connections to the community are strong. I think a lot of these actually are kind of relevant to RCOs and treatment, to be thinking about the factors that really matter. So that's one tool that you can use. The last two categories are infrastructure and capacity to support sustainment. Things like staff possess knowledge and supportive beliefs about the project. There's sufficient training. Some of the nuts and bolts of sustainment based on infrastructure. Implementation support, that it sort of stays on the agenda in a structured way, and isn't sort of determined to be done and move on to something else, but that it stays on the agenda to sort of make improvements over time. Things like, we have a process in place to sustain the project in the event our champion leaves. You know, there is a lot of turnover. What do you do when the person that's really been the one making things happen moves on or retires? And then the last one is evaluation feedback, is just taking a look and knowing when things might start to go off track and catching them based on information. There's lots of different types of information, and then being able to correct things before we go too far off track. So that is one resource. Are there any questions on that? That one. And then another one that seemed appealing when I looked through is, any questions? I didn't see any. Nope. The next one is factors that promote sustainability. And that's this slide. And again, you know, there's some overlap, but it's also in your packet and it's on our website. And the title's Factors That Promote Sustainability. And they go down some different elements here that you could also use for your planning and assessment processes. There's one, this one has a category focused on leadership, which I think expands upon the previous one in terms of making sure that the leadership team brings influence, commitment, and support, making sure it's diverse, has learning orientation and defined roles. So there's a section there on leadership. So it's another opportunity to sort of walk through and think about what you want to be doing and what your organization does. And then the next one. And then there's this British National Health Service model. And again, a lot of work went into this. This one's a little bit older, but I really like some of the questions. And these can be tallied with scores, and they're used in research to do that. but you don't need to worry necessarily about, you know, the score. You can, there's a whole guide on this, and you can score yourself, and it sort of tells you where you're at. But I use them often as just a process, again, to assess where you're at, and to be thinking about, oh, you know, maybe we need to focus on this or that, or we haven't really considered, or we don't really know. Maybe we need to find out. We really don't know how folks are feeling about this. So this was based on a lot of work in sustainability. And one of the quotes here is, sustaining any profound change process requires a fundamental shift in thinking. We need to understand the nature of growth processes and how to catalyze them, but we also need to understand the forces and challenges that impede progress, and to develop workable strategies for dealing with these challenges. So that kind of in a nutshell is the lead into some of the homework or some of the interim work we're going to talk about. And it touches on what Chris had to say, is that it's really important to understand what's happening, and try to collect information that'll inform what's happening, so you know what strategies to try, and you know what's working and what's not, what your facilitators are, what things are really propelling your program, and what things are sort of stalling things out. So this model, like I mentioned, it helps you assess where you're at with a number of key criteria that we know sustain change. It helps you understand barriers that you might have in your local program. It helps you identify your strengths, which are just as important as the barriers, to see those and recognize them and expand upon them. And then it is a way in which you can monitor progress over time. So let me just give you, I'm going to share again, give you an example of this. Oh, let's see, of this questionnaire. Celine, could I share? Do you mind? Thank you. So, this gives you an example. I don't know if you can see it here, of the questionnaire. So it's organized in terms of process in 3 categories: process, staff, and organization. So the first one, it looks like this, is are there benefits beyond helping the patients? So does it make things more efficient? Does it make jobs easier? So again, you can use this and have multiple staff fill this out anonymously, which might be helpful. Credibility of the benefits, you know, are they believed by stakeholders? Are they supported by evidence? How are people viewing the credibility of the benefits of the program? How adaptable is it to being improved? So knowing where you fall on this spectrum, is there a system in place for continually improving things? And effectiveness of the system to monitor progress. Is there something in place where you can monitor progress? And this whole guide is in the website resource page. And then they have some questions on staff. And there's other similar ones that that exist too, but this just kind of gives you an idea. Staff involvement and training to sustain the process, figuring out, you know, how you are doing there. Staff attitudes towards sustaining the change. Do staff feel empowered by the change process? Do staff think it can be sustained? That one can be very helpful. senior leadership engagement, and clinical leadership engagement, which is more focused on a clinical setting. This is probably a little bit more oriented toward treatment programs, but again, it applies to a lot of organizations. And then lastly is with an organization, how does the program or fit with the organization's strategic aims and culture? Is there infrastructure for sustainability? Do you have staff, facilities, equipment, job descriptions, policies and procedures that all support? Do you need to look at those and see if there's ways that they can be more effective at supporting sustainment? So that's another tool that you can use. Any questions on that?
And I would just add to that, Karen, again, going back to, because I do think that matrix or rubric was a little more geared towards a clinical setting. So how do we involve, people with lived experience in recovery, their friends and family, our allies, in those communities in doing those processes? And then I think another aspect that sometimes gets overlooked or lost sometimes is to believe them and do something about it. So again, if we're inviting people into this process and they express that something isn't working and hasn't been working well, that we believe what they're telling us, and then we take action to show them how we're changing the process. Sometimes you have to explain this can't happen tomorrow or next week. Maybe it would be a month or 6 months or a year before that change really gets institutionalized into our processes. But when we invite people in and invite their opinions in, we want to be sure that we honor those things as well.
Excellent point. And I think that when we get to the point of sort of putting together a sustainability plan, which we'll talk about in the next after our break, that's an opportunity to include, not just are you measuring, do you have information that tells you how things are going, but how do you feed that back to people, and how do you affect change, and what are your strategies to address it? Yeah, I think this last one is a little bit more clinically focused. The first one is more prevention focused, and potentially RCO focused. And then there's also another resource I'm going to tell you about too, from C4, which some of you may be familiar with. So I covered this slide, and I think the next 2 slides with that questionnaire. Yep.
We love C4. We partner with C4. They're awesome.
Yeah, they really are. Olivia Davis is fantastic, and all their staff are fantastic. Yeah, so I'll have actually, why don't I do that as the last thing before break here, is to go ahead before we start talking about sustainability planning and share the document I was referring to. Let's see if I can do this. That is from C4, which is again in our website, in our resources. Okay. You know what? I think I have to have it up before I try to share it. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, can you see that? Okay, so this is a document from C4 which I really like. It has a lot of good stuff in it, building infrastructure and sustainability. And this is focused on peer-run recovery community organizations, but I actually use it for some of their strategic planning information for all types of organizations. So this is one I really like. It's really clearly laid out, and has some summary of different workplace laws. So I recommend that this one as well. It doesn't necessarily have a specific scale like some of the others, but it's got some great stuff in it. So we can talk more about that maybe in the second learning session if that's of interest, but that's also something else you can take a look at. And then this is the community toolbox, which is on our list as well. And I have these on a slide for a little bit later when we talk about the next learning session, but this is community toolbox. You probably want to do a search on, excuse me, sustainability, because there's so much here, but this is very well done. And Chris, you've recommended this too, right? You've used this also.
Yeah, and the other document as well, especially for Jeremy and Anna Kate to take a look at that C4 document if you haven't. So valuable in doing just what you mentioned earlier, Jeremy, of building that foundation. So again, you don't turn into this top-heavy organization that, so you build the pyramid, solid foundation, and then go up from there. Tons of links to other resources too, so it doesn't necessarily contain those scales, but you can click links within it that send you out to other places to do those sorts of assessments and sustainability plans.
Excellent, thank you. They also have a really good coronavirus toolbox in here too. So with that, we are right on time to take our break for 15 minutes and return back here right at 3 Eastern. I'm on Pacific, so I got to wrap my head around that. Is that right? Yeah, so we're going to come back at 3 Eastern.
Yep, it's 2:45.
Thank
Eastern.
you.
Mm-hmm.
See you in a few. And before I start on this, I just wanted to say we really welcome feedback. And so please send Rachel any and all feedback. If there's something particular you want to focus on, like, oh, this is really nice, but I just need to write a grant to keep the doors open. When we get to the coaching part, we'll be doing a little bit more one-on-one. But we really welcome your feedback and want to make sure that that we're addressing your interests and your needs. Today is kind of a big picture day, but we'll be starting to drill down a little bit as you'll see in the next few slides. So sustainability planning. So what we're going to do is have a few some interim work that we're going to recommend, and then when we come back together, we'll look through and have some interactive dialogue and some problem solving that gets a little bit more specific to the things that you want to do in your organization. So to do this planning, like I talked about, there's a number of different tools that you can use to sort of assess areas of need. And this really kind of helps you to put together an idea of barriers and facilitators. So just kind of listing out what those things are, which then really helps inform your sustainment plan. And we're going to be doing coaching. Dave's going to be on board to do coaching, as well as Chris and myself. I tend to have a little more background in MOUD and MAT and more sort of clinical settings. Chris has just the perfect expert working in recovery organizations. And then Dave, as you know, is very, very seasoned in prevention coalitions and prevention work. So we should have things pretty well covered to help you out. So the idea is when you really kind of get a feel for where things are at, that to put together a sustainment plan, which I'll talk more about on the next slide. So this is kind of a draft of what I like to recommend, which is just lays things out and gives you something written down that you can come back to periodically. And I must say that, like, I've done a lot of different types of implementations, and this is a piece that people just forget or skip or aren't familiar with. And it can be really helpful, and also, like I said, inform your strategic planning, inform your performance reviews, and inform your staffing. It's just a really nice way to document some of this. So be thinking about what your goals are. You know, is it training? Is it grant writing? Is it redoing your performance review structure? Like what are your goals once you take a look at your organization, figuring out who's going to be responsible, thinking about, we talk a lot about champions. Who's the person that has the energy and the vision to sort of see things through and make things happen? Because a lot of this work really requires perseverance, being organized, having a really good relationship with other people in your organization as well as outside your organization. So thinking about who that person might be. Sometimes they aren't the champion ends up being someone that you didn't expect, who just really gravitates towards a goal and really wants to carry it through. Thinking about your time frame, being as specific as possible. Thinking about different strategies, and we can help with this. What's the type of strategy that's going to work best? How do we want to do the training? What might be most effective? How do we want to engage our stakeholders and other organizations, or in the community, or in the hospital, to improve those relationships? How are we going to measure? So it could be data, it could be, information that you get, or it could be more informal. It could be anything that'll sort of help contribute to understanding how the goal is going, but just making sure that it can be assessed and will be assessed, to make it somewhat tangible. And then this is a way to document the action that you're planning. And also it's very handy to then document the action that you took. Because then if that doesn't work so well, you have it documented and you can try another strategy and another action, but you have a way of keeping track of what worked and what didn't work moving forward. And then I really like having a section for relevant resources and notes. So reminding yourself and others in your organization, and also if the person tracking this happens to move on to another organization, or not be there anymore, this way you have some of this documented. So I really like having a column where you can put in, oh, okay, I used the C4 guide, and page 68 was especially helpful, or whatever it is. So this is sort of, now this is completely your document. You can make up your own categories. This is sort of what I like to recommend that works well, but you can organize this in whatever way works best for you. And then the next slide. So again, some of the questions you want to ask yourselves: how will you assess if the program is reaching the intended patient population? We talked about that before. And again, revise these as needed. It might not be a patient population in this case. It might be for Nicole, working with criminal justice, and that might be the intended stakeholder rather than patients. How are you, oops, I have a veterans thing in here. How are you assess whether the program is continuing to deliver benefits? How will you assess whether the components of the original program continue? And this actually came out of, there's a really nice implementation guide that the VA makes publicly available. And there's a whole chapter on sustainability that this came from. And the next slide, which is why it has the veterans piece in it. And there's the reference.
Karen, is that Oliver K.A.? Is that you?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, nice. Nice. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's a neat guide. They just revised it, or we just revised it. So there's a new version. It's very comprehensive for all types of things to think about when you're implementing. What is your plan to ensure that partnerships among stakeholders are maintained? And how will you ensure that new practices, procedures, policies are maintained? And really what you want to do is to have it be the way you do things. It's that to have it just be routine, and to have it continue and sustain the changes that you've made. So those are kind of some guiding questions you can ask yourself when you're filling this out. And then next.
Well, and I think during that process too, even identifying, we all know our organizations best. So each of you are your own experts in your organization, and you know who those change agents are, you know who is usually the first to raise their hand to jump onto a new project, and you know the other side, people who are maybe a little more ingrained in the old way we do things. And so just to kind of think that through, and how do you have conversations with people, because anytime we introduce a new way to do things, it can create a little bit of panic in people. Like, what does this mean? Why are we changing? Does it mean the old way was bad or broken? Does it mean, what does it mean for my role in particular? So just to kind of think through, you might have to describe things differently to those early adopters than you would to someone that's gonna, will come on board, but just might need a little more coaxing, and you might need to massage that relationship a little bit more.
Absolutely. So these are some of the resources we talked about today. They're all in the site, and feel free to reach out if you need help finding things. I think we touched on all of these, but the idea is to use the ones that are helpful, and then sort of start to draft your plan of the things you want to work on through this project. And the next slide. So I've sort of already introduced this earlier, this plan for interim work. And so the next slide. So the structure for our project is that we would have another learning session in about a month, potentially 6 weeks, given the holidays. And so at our next learning session, it would be an opportunity to sort of discuss your progress on doing this task we outlined, getting feedback, sharing it with the group, and having sort of hearing less from me and more from you all. And so that would involve reviewing draft action plans and outline some key steps to take. We're going to have a piece that's sort of hopefully an interactive piece with Dave and Chris and I, which is about working with stakeholders and some of those relationships where Chris really has a lot of expertise, and sort of the comment she actually just made about thinking through carefully how to really enrich those relationships. And then we're going to have a little bit on tools and techniques you can use to get back on track if you start to wander from your goals. And then after that, we're going to have some coaching. So we're anticipating maybe 2 to 3 coaching sessions, depending on your needs. That'll take place probably bi-weekly after that, where you can really get some customized coaching with us moving forward. And then the next slide. So any questions on that plan? Again, we're going to be working on the next learning session soon. So if there's areas you'd like us to cover that would be helpful, or if you want to give us any input, please let us know.
Elise-
And
Sorry, Elise, did you have a question?
I was just wondering, like, how many goals, like, do you want us to come up with, I mean, because like we could come up with, you know, a whole bunch of things. So do you want us to just come up with 2 or 3, or what's your, like, what are you
well,
trying to?
basically use the opportunity in whatever way works for you. If you have several, I forgot to mention, it might be that you have a plan for your coalition, and then you have another plan for the rest of your organization. So you could have
That's
two.
true.
So it's an opportunity to get feedback from Dave. And so I would just say, you know, with whatever time and energy allows, you can go as far as you'd like, to have the opportunity to get some coaching on it.
When I really advocate too, looking at the quality versus the quantity. And so using the opportunity to even document, like, how did you determine what you're going to work on, and document the process of determining that. And then once you choose the item or two that you're going to work on, document the process of how you then implemented or you know, took the steps on that chosen item, because those are sustainability tools too. So those are the tools that when you leave the organization, those documents will still exist for your coalition and for the person maybe that comes in and replaces you in your role, to use down the line. So then ideally they wouldn't necessarily need to go to a sustainability institute, because they have a, a process documented within their organization of how to do that.
Excellent advice. Yeah, and that's where, like what Chris was talking about, those were the strategy column and the action column. That sometimes it's really helpful to think about them differently. They're both really important. And we try to kind of keep a running list of, okay, what did we try? Did it work? And what are we going to do next? And then, you know, a year goes by and then you have different people involved and they're like, well, let's try this. And, you know, it might be a different situation. And so it's just really nice to have that as a living document in an ongoing way. So given that, I wanted to ask about dates. Given the holidays, December 14th would be coming up very quick, but that's one option if you want to keep the momentum going, and not waiting till after the December holidays, and early January holidays. I believe there's some there too. We could do December 14th. And then otherwise, these are some January dates that worked for our team. So go ahead and you can put stuff in the chat and we'll make a copy of that. So, and if none of these work, then just let us know and we'll figure something out. So let us know about that. And then I just want to say thank you all. Oh, and then there's, oops. Well, I just want to say thank you all. I mean, it sounds a little bit like an airline, but we know you have a lot of things competing for your time, and that you made this a priority and made this happen, especially this year with so many stresses and demands in weird ways that we're not used to. Just thank you for participating. It's a really kind of exciting opportunity for the Opioid Response Network to do this work, and have the time to focus. So we're grateful for SAMHSA, for the ORN. And I really want to thank Rachel Whitmer for just really keeping us organized and having the website. And also want to send a shout out to the TTSs that connected us, who I'm grateful for. So Marvis and Sharon and Celine. And then with that, the next slide is just our list of references. But like I said, the tools we talked about today are also in in the website. These slides are a little bit revised from the ones you're getting in your packet. So the link to those will also be in the website. We added a couple in after I sent out the packet. Any questions, ideas, concerns, songs? Any musicians that can lead us, close our session today?
Nicole and Jeremy had a couple of comments on the times.
Okay.
For the session 2. So January 8th for Jeremy. Anna's easy breezy, and Nicole says that she's unavailable on the 14th.
Okay, so it looks like maybe January 8th. How does that sound to everybody? Oh, that would be very exciting to have that determined. So let's go ahead with January 8th. Let's see.
Looks
Now
good to us.
time, is the time good for everybody? Starting around the same time? I know it's kind of starting, well, I guess it's after lunch for East Coast. Is most everybody's East Coast, right? Except, well, we've got, except Colorado. Does this time, so 1:30 to 3:30 Eastern work for everybody on the 8th? Deal, all right, excellent.
And pathways to Liza, Aaron, Elise, and Ryan said the 8th could work for them too.
Okay.
We're good.
Wonderful, well, I love it. That Rachel will be so happy. That will save her hours. So January 8th, 1:30 to 3:30 Eastern.